The last letter. One message remained unread, and it carried a chilling secret. The letter lay inside the envelope like a ghost that had waited too long to speak. I found it tucked between the yellowed pages of my late father's journal, its paper brittle with time yet strangely unbroken, as though it had been waiting for my hands alone. The ink, though faded, still pulsed with something unfinished, words meant to outlive their author. But I couldn't bring myself to unfold it, not yet. I had buried my father 3 months ago, his death sudden, a collapse in the library he so fiercely guarded. No illness, no warning, just silence and an unfinished cup of tea on the mahogany desk. The coroner wrote it off as cardiac arrest, but the way his study had been locked from the inside gnawed at me. The key was found in his pocket, yet the window, latch was unhooked, open to the autumn rain. I told myself it was nothing, that grief had sharpened my paranoia, but still, the pieces never sat right. The discovery of the letter only deepened that unease. Why hide it here between diary pages from 20 years ago? Why keep it sealed, never addressed, never sent? My father was not a careless man. Every note he wrote had purpose, every file in his cabinets meticulously labeled. For him to conceal, something like this meant it was either dangerous or damning. The house itself did not help my nerves. It was too large for one. Its echoing halls still scented faintly of old smoke and leather. I returned because someone had to catalog his things, but each room felt alive with his absence. The clocks ticked louder here, the shadows stretched, longer. The study, especially, was suffocating. His presence lingered in every book spine, every scribbled margin note. The leather chair still carried the shape of his body, as though he might return any second. And now, this letter sat in my palm like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I told myself I would open it after dinner, after a drink, after gathering the courage I had been rationing since the funeral. But when I returned to the study that night, the envelope was no longer on the desk where I'd left it. The journal remained, but the letter was gone. I froze in the doorway. Only one person had a key to the house: me. My father had no close friends who visited, no neighbors who cared enough to pry. Yet something in me whispered that the walls were not as empty as they seemed. I scoured the room, half frantic, overturning books, rifling through drawers. Then, just as I convinced myself I had misplaced it, I saw it, perched neatly on the windowsill, the envelope facing outward, as though waiting for someone beyond the glass. The window had been latched earlier. Now it stood open, the curtains breathing in the night air. I stepped closer, every muscle rigid, half expecting to see a figure in the darkness. But there was only the rain, tapping gently against the stone. I took the letter back into my hands, colder now, damp along the edges as though it had tasted the storm. And finally, I broke the seal. The handwriting was my father's, but uneven, jagged, nothing like the precise script I knew. Only a few lines stretched across the page, each word dragging weight behind it. If you are reading this, it means they found me. Do not trust the man with the silver pen. He is not who he claims to be. And whatever you do, never open the locked drawer beneath the desk. My pulse hammered so violently I almost dropped the page. I glanced down at the heavy oak desk before me. The drawer he spoke of had always been sealed, its key missing, a curiosity I had ignored. Now the letter made it feel like a coffin waiting to be pried open. But before I could move, something shifted behind me. A faint creak, like a footstep, on wood. The letter slipped from my hand, and in that silence I realized I was not alone in the study. The study grew colder, the air thick enough to feel against my skin. I did not turn immediately, afraid that what waited behind me would take shape only if I acknowledged it. My father's warning pulsed inside my skull, the words etched in trembling ink. Do not trust the man with the silver pen. Never open the locked drawer. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, I turned. The doorway was empty, the corridor beyond swallowed in shadow. Yet something was wrong. A faint scent drifted in the air, ink and metal, sharp as blood on steel. The odor had no place in this house. I stepped cautiously into the hall, listening. The grandfather clock ticked below in the foyer, steady and indifferent, but somewhere above a floorboard groaned under a weight too heavy for memory. I should have left. Any rational person would have locked the study, gone outside, called someone, anyone. But grief is not rational, and fear can be a tether as much as a warning. The house had taken on the quality of a riddle, and I knew leaving it unsolved would haunt me forever. I returned to the desk. The locked drawer seemed to breathe under my gaze, the brass handle tarnished yet sturdy, unyielding. I tugged at it once more as though the letter might have been a cruel trick, but the wood resisted. My father had hidden its key somewhere, and if his letter was to be believed, the contents were not meant for my eyes. Still, curiosity is a blade, and mine had already cut too deep. The letter itself I slipped into my pocket. Whatever secret he had carried, I would not lose it again. Then I noticed something else on the desk, nearly invisible against the dark grain, a thin scratch running parallel to the drawer, as though a sharp object had been dragged there. My father's silver fountain pen often sat in that very place. It had been missing since his death, a detail I had barely registered at the time. The thought unsettled me. His warning about a man with a silver pen no longer felt metaphorical. What if it had been taken? What if it had changed hands and whoever held it now had already been here? I searched the rest of the study, tracing my fingers along the spines of his books, pulling volumes from the shelves. Most were academic texts, historical treatises, languages dead to modern ears. But hidden among them, I found a slim notebook, unlabeled, its cover worn. The pages inside contained only fragments, lists of names, coded numbers, dates I did not recognize. In the margins, always the same phrase, "Not safe. Watch the pen." A noise interrupted me. This time, not a floorboard, but the front door latch snapping open. My chest seized. No one had a key. I froze, holding the notebook close, straining to hear. The door shut softly, followed by the dull click of shoes on the marble floor. I extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the faint wash of moonlight through the window. My heart thudded in rhythm with the intruder's steps below. Slow, measured, deliberate. They were not searching blindly. They knew where they were going. The sound climbed the staircase, each tread deliberate, as though the figure wanted me to hear. I backed away from the desk, every nerve strung tight, until my shoulders pressed against the bookshelves. I could make out a shadow stretching along the corridor wall. A tall silhouette, lean, steady, carrying something that glinted, briefly in the light before vanishing into darkness again. The silver pen. I did not wait to see the face. I bolted for the opposite door, moving as silently as fear would allow, slipping into the narrow servants' passage that ran behind the bedrooms. The house's age worked in my favor. The intruder's steps were loud on the main floorboards, but here I moved like breath through stone. I descended the back staircase and slipped into the cellar, heart pounding, lungs burning. Down there, the air was damp, the stone walls closing in. Shelves of old wine bottles and storage trunks lined the room, relics of decades past. I crouched in the shadows, trying to steady myself, clutching the notebook so hard it crumpled in my hand. Above, the footsteps moved through the study, slow and methodical, then paused. Silence followed, heavy and deliberate, as though the intruder knew I was listening. A drawer scraped open, the locked drawer, but I had the only key I knew of, or so I believed. The silence stretched until a sound cut through it, the creak of the drawer yielding, the hollow slam of it shutting, and then those careful footsteps began again. Only this time, they were descending the stairs. The intruder was coming to the cellar, and I had nowhere left to run. The cellar walls closed around me, their damp breath clinging to my skin. I crouched behind a stack of crates, every muscle wound tight, every heartbeat a betrayal of sound. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, unhurried, deliberate, as though the intruder knew I was here and savored the hunt. A faint metallic click echoed, followed by the thin scratch of metal against stone. I risked a glance through the gap in the crates. A hand moved along the wall, pale in the dim light, something silver glinting between the fingers. My father's pen. The intruder dragged it slowly across the stone, leaving no mark but filling the silence with menace. I pulled the notebook tighter, to my chest, crumpling the fragile spine. If the letter was true, then whoever this was had already found my father. Which meant this figure in the cellar might not be a stranger at all. My mind chased names, faces, colleagues of his from the university, men who had hovered at the funeral with eyes too curious, hands too eager on my shoulder. The steps moved closer. I forced myself to breathe through my mouth, silent, shallow. The intruder stopped at the far end of the cellar, and I heard another sound. Wood scraping, a trunk being shifted. Then came a hollow thud, as though something had been retrieved. From inside, the figure lingered a moment longer, then climbed the stairs again. The door shut, and silence reclaimed the dark. I waited longer than necessary before I dared to move. My legs trembled as I rose. At the far end of the cellar, the trunk sat ajar, its lid carelessly dropped shut but not sealed. I edged toward it, each step unwilling. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with string, older than the notebook in my hands, their edges yellowed and fragile. I lifted them free. The documents were in my father's handwriting, but unlike anything I had seen before. Reports, observations, notes on individuals whose names I did not recognize, coded with initials, cities, dates. A pattern of disappearances, threaded through them, people erased from records, their trails vanishing in familiar towns. The further I read, the clearer it became. My father had been following something, an organization perhaps, one that operated beneath the surface of ordinary lives. And then, at the bottom of the bundle, I found another envelope. This one, already, torn open. Inside was only a photograph. My father, seated at his desk, but not alone. A man stood beside him, blurred by the angle, yet one detail cut through the haze, a silver pen in his hand, gleaming against the paper they studied together. I recoiled as though the photograph burned me. The figure was tall, lean, unmistakably the silhouette I had seen upstairs. Whoever he was, he hadn't just entered our lives now. He had been inside them long before. I climbed from the cellar clutching the bundle, fear sharpening into determination. Whatever my father had left unfinished, I could not ignore it. The study was empty when I returned, though the drawer beneath the desk now sat slightly ajar. My hands shook as I pulled it open. Inside was no hoard of files, no locked secrets in neat rows, just a single object resting on velvet cloth. A small box, plain, wooden, its surface etched with faint grooves as if from nails clawing against it. I reached for it, hesitant, then froze. The sound returned. A door opening, somewhere deeper in the house. I snatched the box, shoved it into my coat, and slipped from the study. My pulse thundered as I crossed the hall, heading for the front door. But when I reached it, I stopped dead. On the floor lay a folded sheet of paper, clean, crisp, as though placed there moments ago. I bent slowly, hands trembling, and unfolded it. The handwriting was not my father's. It was sharper, colder. A single line stretched across the page, written in black ink that shimmered faintly in the light. You were never meant to open the drawer. My throat tightened. Whoever had left this had walked freely through the house, close enough to watch me, close enough to know what I had touched. The box inside my coat seemed to grow heavier, as though it carried not just wood and air, but the weight of something far older, far darker. And in that moment I understood. The letter I had found was not the end of my father's message. It was the beginning of mine. The box weighed against my chest like a second heart, beating with its own rhythm. I could not bring myself to open it yet, not with the echo of that warning still burning across the note. You were never meant to open the drawer. The intruder's presence hung in the air, invisible but certain. Whoever he was, he knew my every move, as though the house itself had betrayed me. I retreated into the library, bolting the heavy oak door behind me. My father had once told me that books carried truths people were too afraid to speak aloud. Now the shelves loomed like silent witnesses, the smell of dust and paper thick in my lungs. I cleared a space on the table, set down the bundle of documents and placed the wooden box in front of me. My hands hovered above it. I half expected a mechanism, a trick, something to spring when I touched the lid. But nothing moved. The grooves, etched into its surface, seemed random, but as I ran my fingers across them, they began to form a pattern. Letters, faint but deliberate, carved into the wood, a word I could only make out under the lamplight. Sable. I whispered it aloud, tasting the strangeness of it. A name, perhaps, or a code. My father had scrawled similar fragments in his notebooks, always in the margins, always circled. Sable. The box creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside lay not treasures, not stacks of files, but only 3 items. The first was a brass key, tarnished but strong. The second, a torn page from one of his journals, with a line scrawled in frantic ink. The last letter will tell her what I could not. And the third, tucked beneath the key, a smaller envelope with my name written in my father's unmistakable hand. My breath caught. The paper trembled as I unfolded it. My child, if this reaches you, then it means I am gone. You must know the truth. I was not who you believed me to be. For years I watched, recorded, followed the movements of those who lived in shadow. They called themselves Sable, a network buried beneath governments, moving through cities, erasing lives. The man with the silver pen is one of them. He was my colleague once. I trusted him, and it cost me everything. He will come for you as he came for me. Do not give him what is inside this house. Leave now, while you still can. The words blurred as my eyes stung. My father, secret keeper, scholar of the past, had been tangled in something far larger than I could imagine. And now, by reading this, I was tangled too. I slid the letter back into the envelope, forcing down the wave of grief that threatened to drown me. The brass key glinted under the lamp. If it belonged to the locked drawer, it was useless now, but perhaps it opened something else, another part of the house, another truth my father had hidden. I was still staring at it when the library door rattled violently. The bolt strained, wood splintering under pressure. My pulse jolted. He was here. The silver pen scraped against the door, the sound piercing, deliberate. Then, silence. I extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and pressed my back against the shelves. My mind raced. The only escape lay through the narrow servants' passage that connected the library to the east wing. I slipped, the key and the letter into my pocket, clutched the box to my chest, and moved swiftly. The passage smelled of dust and old stone, its narrowness suffocating. My footsteps whispered against the floor, the only sound besides my breath. I reached the east wing and paused, listening. The house was too still, as though it too were holding its breath. Then from the darkness behind me, a voice slid into the silence. Low, measured, familiar. You opened it, didn't you? The words froze me where I stood. The silver pen clicked, once like a knife locking into place, and I realized the intruder had not been searching for the box. He had been waiting for me to. The last letter. One message remained unread, and it carried a chilling secret. The passage closed around me like a throat, choking the air from my lungs. His voice lingered there, too calm, too certain, as if the walls themselves bent to carry his words. The silver pen clicked again, a deliberate rhythm, drawing me back toward the darkness where he waited. I forced myself forward, gripping the wooden box tighter. My father's letter pulsed in my pocket, the weight of his warning, undeniable now. Sable was not a myth, not paranoia on brittle paper. It was alive, and it had found me. At the end of the passage, the door to the east wing yawned open into a cold, moonlit hall. I stumbled into it, slamming the door shut behind me, fumbling. The brass key into the lock. The metal caught, turned, and held. For a moment I breathed again, but the echo of his words still hunted me. You opened it, didn't you? I didn't dare answer the question aloud, though in truth the box already spoke for me. I had crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. My father's secrets were mine. Now I hurried through the east wing, past long-forgotten rooms draped in dust sheets, toward the narrow stair that led to the attic. If the key unlocked anything else, it would be there. My father had always kept the attic bolted, even from me, though I'd never questioned why. Now every question bled together into a single demand. What had he been hiding? The stair groaned beneath my weight. At the top, a door waited, heavy, scarred, with a keyhole that seemed to breathe in the shadows. I slid the brass key inside. It turned easily, as though it had been waiting for me. The attic smelled of paper and rot. Moonlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating stacks of crates and folders, all neatly labeled, all untouched for years. My father's archive. He hadn't just studied Sable, he had documented them. I set the box down and opened the nearest crate. Inside were files, names, photographs, reports, each one tied to disappearances across decades. Sable had operated. Longer than I imagined, their reach stretching far beyond one city, one life. At the bottom of the pile, a name caught my eye. Mine. My hands shook as I pulled it free. A file with my photograph clipped to the corner, notes in an unfamiliar hand, detailing my movements, my studies, my relationships. Surveillance, precise and unrelenting. The file ended with a final line scrawled in black ink. Target aware. Initiate removal. The silver pen had written this. The air shifted behind me. I turned slowly, dread crawling my spine. He stood in the doorway, tall, lean, a shadow framed by pale moonlight. The silver pen glimmered in his hand, raised like a blade. His face was calm, expressionless, as though this moment had been rehearsed 100 times. You were never meant to see this, he said, voice low, steady. I backed away, clutching the file. My father, he knew what you were. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on the box. And now you know. That makes you dangerous. His gaze lingered on me, then on the crate of files. But you don't understand. This was never about your father. It was always about you. The words struck like ice. Always about me. My life had been catalogued, scripted, drawn into their web long before I found the letter. My father hadn't stumbled into Sable. He had tried to shield me from them and failed. He raised the pen higher, the metal catching the light like a shard of moon. In that instant, instinct overtook fear. I hurled the wooden box at him. It struck his shoulder and he staggered, the pen clattering to the floor. I lunged for it, snatching the cold metal in my grip. Its weight was heavier than it looked, too. Heavy for a simple pen. He straightened, fury flickering across his face for the first time. You don't know what you hold. The pen pulsed faintly in my hand. A vibration, a hum beneath the casing. It wasn't just a pen. It was something more. Something that had killed my father. Something meant to erase me. I met his eyes, breath ragged, and pressed the tip against his chest. No, I whispered, but I know what it took from me. I drove it forward. A flash of light burst between us, searing white, then darkness swallowed the attic whole. When my vision cleared, the man was gone. Only the smell of smoke lingered, acrid and heavy. The pen lay in my palm, silent once more, as though it had never been alive at all. I stood alone in the attic, surrounded by files that named me a target, the weight of my father's secrets pressing down. The letter had been right. Some messages refused to be silenced. And now, mine had begun. This, my dear friends, is the end of this story. Tomorrow, another tale waits in the shadows, ready to keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the mysteries still to come.